What I've been doing though this past week is what's called a new term, never heard before, but doom scrolling. You ever heard of that? That's a new one. I've been doom scrolling as it relates to the war in Ukraine. I guess doom scrolling is kind of like you're, anxious and obsessed about something, so you keep scrolling and refreshing to see the latest updates and stuff. I don't know. This Russian war is pretty intense. Uh, and if you are a millennial like myself or younger, you haven't seen anything like this before. This is new. Folks above us, Gen Xers, I guess, and boomers. The boomers know for sure. Cold War. They've lived through stuff like this. They've lived through hostilities in Europe and all that. But for us, this is brand new. And so one thing I've learned through my doom scrolling is, there's a lot of young folk my age and younger that are like it's like an illusion's being shattered. Real life is evident that, we live in a very fragile society. And the illusion is that, things have continued on and will continue on as is. The illusion is that humanity's figuring it out and, is kind of putting aside, old archaic ways of dealing with each other, as far as the hostilities. Yeah, we might have like a war in the Middle East every once in a while, but, overall society's advancing, humanity is advancing, and it's, we're figuring things out. We're getting more logical and reasonable and tolerant of each other and that kind of thing. It's kind of like the Star Trek utopia idea that Star Trek's based on the idea that humanity figures it out. And so we're free to explore the stars. And so I think that was maybe not like vocalized exactly, but I feel like for young people, that's kind of the expectation that, the scariest thing we're going to have to deal with is like, a mild cold or something, or COVID, something worse, right? But, the illusion shattered. And so young people are grappling with the idea of like nuclear annihilation as a real threat and possibility for the first time ever. Older folks are used to this kind of concern. We're new to it. And it's kind of like, man, we're not really getting better and we're not really figuring it out. And we've never really been free from the threat of annihilation. And if anything, recently things are getting worse and worse. That's pretty scary. And so I see there's a lot of, in my doom scrolling, seeing a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, and also a lot of people that don't understand the gravity of the situation. So they're like, yeah, we should just go drop bombs on Moscow. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You don't know what the stakes are here. The stakes are very high. Scary. But, young folk are, I suppose, many of them are surprised. God's not surprised. He tells us the nature of humans, which is, there's something sick within us. There's something just broken, right? Calls that sin. And so the idea that like more technology and time, that passes and we're like, going to be more civil over time, or going to approach some kind of, utopia is kind of ridiculous. He recognized that there's something broken within us. And as a matter of fact, if we were going to figure things out ourselves and, reach global peace and all that, like really, there would have been no need for Jesus to come. There would have been no need for a Messiah to die for us and solve our sin problem because we could just solve it on our own. But, as time goes on, the Bible's proven right over and over and over again. And that's actually filled me with a lot of confidence because ultimately I recognize that world events and everything is being guided by the Lord. He's ultimately in charge of everything, and he has an end in plan, but he knows how that's going to be. And, it's something that must happen, and he's going to guide it that way so we can trust him. But tonight, looking at the birth of Jesus, really the aftermath of that, reactions to that, it's really the story of Jesus, God himself, entering into the chaos and confusion of our world. It's God, he comes personally, he'll deal with it. He enters into our reality to bring a solution, a real solution, right? Political solutions work temporarily if they work at all. God's solution works eternally. And that's why the arrival of God to planet Earth as Jesus Christ is the most important event that's ever occurred in our history. Not even close. I guess maybe his death on the cross, paying for sin, is up there, but you know what I mean. This is what history has been building up to right here, and this has been the prediction in the Old Testament. Ian talked a lot about this last week. That these predictions, the Old Testament, which they had, and lots of copies of, talked about this Messiah who was to come, and the manner of his coming, where he would come, and for example, Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah. Nailed it. Though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times, right? So we have even the location talking about a ruler, a king Messiah who would come, and yet it's kind of juxtaposed with other messianic prophecies that are, have a different tone to him. Isaiah 53, for example, he was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their face. There's like shame involved here. He's despised, and we held him in low esteem. So you have these two pictures of like a Messiah. Okay, is he this conquering, glorious ruler, or is he like this shameful, lowly kind of person? These don't match. And obviously, we have today a better understanding, like, how could someone be a king and yet be a suffering, lowly person of low esteem at the same time? Well, that's like perfectly describes Jesus and who he is. We have the advantage of time and the Bible, but, put yourself in the shoes of an ancient person who, an ancient Jew who would be familiar with the Old Testament. Like, there's some confusion, there's some mystery here. But nonetheless, at this time, as we're approaching the first century, as we're approaching the birth of Christ, there was already in place an expectation for the Messiah. The window, people realized on a wide scale in the area, was open, that conditions were being met for the Messiah to come. Because you have a ton of prophecies talking about the Messiah, and as a matter of fact, the stars themselves were aligning in quite a literal way we're going to talk about tonight. But also, you have specific prophecies like in Daniel 9 that even point to like a very specific date for the Messiah. But nonetheless, the expectation widely was that the Messiah is going to come anytime. This was in the first century. And there's even extra biblical sources, not the Bible, other sources that confirm the reality that people were expecting the Messiah. This is Suetonius. He's an ancient historian, and he's non-Christian, but he writes that there had spread over all the Orient an old and established belief that it was fated at that time for men coming from Judea to rule the world. This prediction, referring to the emperor of Rome, see, he thought it was the emperor of Rome because he recognized everyone's talking about the Messiah should be coming soon. The Messiah should be coming soon. And he's like, well, it was actually the emperor of Rome. They were confused. Nonetheless, as afterwards appeared from the event, the people of Judea took to themselves accordingly. They revolted. So he's like, kind of explains there was like a Jewish revolt that happened and Rome crushed it and destroyed the temple. But he's like, there was this fervor that the Messiah is supposed to be coming around this time. According to the prophecies, this is the window. And we're ready for him. Let's revolt, And so he confirms, among others, there's even like clay tablets found in Babylon that confirms. I'll have more on that in a bit here. But the point is, there was expectation there. Like, all eyes on Judea. People were waiting with bated breath. Where is the Messiah? Where is he going to come? And it's interesting, though, because this window for the Messiah, for the prophecies to truly be fulfilled in every literal way, that window closed. And it closed very definitely at the destruction of the temple, in Jerusalem. After that was destroyed, after the people of Israel scattered and they didn't have their national identity anymore, the window was over and that expectation was gone. But it was there for a little bit in the first century AD. It was there. And so it's like, it's just amazing to me that people that, would be still expecting a Messiah, even to this day, Orthodox Jews believe such a thing. It's like, but the window's closed. The window's closed. And so I wonder, during that little bit of time where nationally everyone was ready for it and expecting it in the first century AD, was there anyone who appeared there at that time who could maybe be the Messiah? Okay, yeah, right. Jesus, right? And if it's not him, then it's nobody. That's the point. Um, so anyway, that's one of the really cool things I'll point out here about Jesus and about God is that he doesn't expect us to trust Jesus as Messiah blindly. He gives this authentication that believe for reasons, believe for evidence. Everything points to this guy. Don't just believe it because someone tells you, but believe it because there's reasons to. So that's something that's really compelling to me. But as we look at these reactions, we're going to be challenged here tonight. What is your reaction to Jesus? Because no reaction doesn't make any sense. You're going to have some kind of reaction to him. We're going to learn from three different groups here, their reactions, which I think reflect really well for today. But let's start chapter 2, verse 1. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king," who's a very significant historical figure, Herod the Great, he's called, a lot written about him. "But behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem," also called Magi, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." So we're going to go over these Magi here in a bit, but what's interesting here is that they're coming and the sign is a star, right? A star is guiding them. So, it could be something supernaturally. God put something in the sky just for them, leads them there. But as I was doing studying here, what I found out really compelling is the astronomical situation of the day. And I was reading from this guy, Michael Green, who's a famous theologian. But, looking at astronomy. Astrology is the idea of reading signs and stuff in the stars. So for Magi, and the ancient superstitious mind, the reading of the stars, the planets all had significance tied to it, right? And so there happened to be astronomical forces at play here that were spiritually significant in 7 BC, right at the time you would expect the Messiah to be born. Because, again, it says that Herod was king. He was king up until 4 BCs when he died, so Jesus would have had to have been born before that. But it's interesting. In 7 BC, there was a conjunction of planets, which would have been very obvious in the sky. These planets, Saturn and Jupiter, coming together, extra bright. And this happened 3 times in the year 7 BC. And this is an event. This particular conjunction is an event that happens once every 950, 60 years, basically. Really rare kind of thing. But this year happened 3 times. And Saturn, in the ancient mind, represented, especially among Israel and the superstitious folk there, astrologers there, Saturn represented Israel itself. It was kind of the significant planet. Jupiter represented royalty, royal planet. And so a professional astrologer of that day would recognize the conjoining of these two in the east, as signifying that a king, a new age is coming, where a king will arise from Judea, right? And so, this is part of what I think, too, what lends credibility to this is that expectation, right? That there's an expectation that a new age is dawning in Judea. The Messiah is supposed to come. A king is supposed to come. And even the astrologers of that day would have all the signs they need to say the same thing. And so it's no wonder that this was a commonly held belief. The Messiah is supposed to come. The stars are literally aligning for it. Right? And so, I believe probably this is what, these Magi would be seeing and reading is that, it's God using their superstition, their belief about the planets to communicate to them, to reach out to them and to show them the reality, which is, Jesus, which is pretty fascinating. But anyway, I just found that interesting that 7 BC seems to be a really unique year for this. So more on Herod, he says, "When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him." Yeah, if Herod's troubled, all Jerusalem is. "Assembling all the chief priests and scribes and the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born," which Christ means king. "They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet," which we just read, right? "And you, O Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means least among the rulers. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel," right? So Herod the Great says he's troubled and concerned. This guy, I mentioned earlier, very important historical figure. Why was he so concerned? Why was he so distressed about this? Well, Herod the Great, he was basically kind of the authority before Rome. He had authority as king in the area of Judea. And he called himself the king of the Jews. And he did a lot in his life to try to like earn favor among the Jewish people, but they rejected him and they didn't like him. And the reason was he wasn't from the correct line to claim king of the Jews. He came from the line of Esau, but as we know, the king of the Jews is supposed to come through Jacob and through the tribes, the right tribes. We went our first teaching in Matthew. We went through the genealogy, right? And yet Herod, he's the wrong guy, and yet he's claiming to be king of the Jews, and he wanted to like be the heroic Jewish king, but the people rejected him on that, despite many attempts. He's the one that, for example, like really built up the temple there. There was already a temple, but he like upgraded it and made it beautiful and awesome. He's like, look, don't you guys love me now? But they did not. And so he always carried that resentment with him. And, as a result, the idea of like a real king of Jerusalem is distressing to him, to say the least. It threatens his position and, also triggers his jealousy. But he was also paranoid. He was a homicidal maniac. He literally executed his wife and sons because they feared them plotting against him. He basically, if there was even a whiff of like, you're against me, I'm going to kill you. And actually I found this, I didn't realize, but it was attributed to the emperor of Rome, Augustus. He reportedly said that it was better to be Herod's pig than his son, for his pig had a better chance of surviving in a Jewish community. Which is a joke because Jews, they don't eat pork. But if you were a son of Herod, you had a good chance of dying there. Totally paranoid, totally crazy. So if he's distressed, all of Jerusalem is distressed alongside him. Another group here, though. Another group, right? So we have Herod, but we have the chief priests and the scribes of the people. So they're right there with them. And this is significant because the scribes, the chief priests, they would have an intimate understanding of the Old Testament, as demonstrated here. They knew the prophecies. But what's fascinating here is they know this. They recognize that it's significant. They can quote the prophecies, and yet they do nothing about it. They're not going out trying to find this Messiah, right? They're just like telling Herod, which he knows that they would know that's a death sentence. He shouldn't be knowing this stuff. And otherwise they do nothing. They go nowhere, which is, you would expect the opposite, right? If you knew the Old Testament scriptures, if you believed them, if you trusted that there's supposed to be a Messiah, and if you knew the time is coming, wouldn't you take interest in this? How could you be so apathetic? We'll return to them in a bit. So Herod hatches a plan here, verse 7. It says, then Herod secretly called the Magi. Remember, they were coming, seeking him. They were following the star. And determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. And when you have found him, report to me so that I too may come and worship him. Yeah, okay, Putin, I'm sure. Wants to worship him. Obviously lying. Sends him on a mission. So what are the Magi going to do? After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. Where the child was. Now, I'll just note here because, we've all seen like the nativities are set up, baby Jesus, there's the wise men over them, over the baby. But this, that's inaccurate, technically. Still, looks beautiful and stuff, but inaccurate. The Magi would have come, months, if not a year later, and he would have been a child. There's a different word here for it's child, not infant. So they're like visiting a child, Jesus. So they would not have come at the same time as the shepherds or whatever. Also, I'll mention, in the nativity, you always see like 3 wise men, but it doesn't say how many. There could have been 100. It's probably too many, but, maybe 3. I don't know. Probably more, though. But anyway, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Extra explanation there. Gotta love it. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Now, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, these would be like kingly gifts, really valuable, certainly at the very least, establishing that, they recognize and are honoring him as the king. But there's also potential other links here, like myrrh would be used for embalming. So maybe recognizing that, death is involved here. I don't know. It doesn't say that, though. I mean, some people have put that forward. I don't know. All we know for sure is, these are kingly gifts indeed. Like the mithril shirt in Lord of the Rings. Oh, that is a kingly gift. It's like, I got to stop nerding out on that. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. All right. So, they put a lot of stock in dreams and visions. And so God comes to them in a dream and vision, warns them to go and not tell Herod. Anyway, let's talk a little more about the Magi. Fascinating stuff here. So these would have been kind of like a holy people, a priestly kind of people from Persia, and superstitious, very superstitious. They would have been, it's kind of unclear in the historical record whether they were dualists who believe in like a good God and an evil God that are equally powerful, combating. That's dualism, which is not Christianity. We believe in God and Satan, but God's like way more powerful than Satan, so it's not the same thing. Or some kind of early monotheist. They're not 100% sure, but what is true, what we do know, obviously, is that they're superstitious. They believed in astrology, put a lot of stock in, signs in the heavens and things like that. And the point is, though, they were non-believers. And it's interesting that God would choose to reveal the coming of the king to non-believers, non-Jews, especially people who have like the exact opposite views and wrong views, wrong theology. And yet God singles them out to be people who come and are blown away by the truth of his son. Amazing. Why would God do that? Well, here's the thing that God looks for. He's not looking for the right morals. He's not looking for the most upstanding, correct people. What God looks at, the Bible tells us, is the heart. That's what he's most concerned with. Later on in Matthew, we're going to read this, Matthew 7:7, give you a little preview. Ask, and it will be given to you, Jesus says. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. So this is the quality that God is most concerned with. Do you have an open heart or not? Are you a spiritual seeker, or spiritually are you closed off? In the end, that's all that matters. If you are open to him, or if you've closed yourself off. Not how good of a person are you, not how correct are your current beliefs. It is, are you open to the Lord or not? 2 Chronicles 69 says, for the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. It's a question of the heart. That's the main issue. Where is your heart? Is it a seeking heart or a closed off heart? And this is the difference with the Magi. They didn't have the correct beliefs. And as a matter of fact, they were quite mistaken. These heavenly bodies, are not significant other than they're giant and they're in space. They didn't have concept of that stuff. But God used that to tell them the truth, to bring them into a knowledge of the truth. He met them where they were at. That's the point. Nabil Qureshi, he was a famous Christian. He was a Muslim and he became a Christian, became an apologist for Christianity. And his ministry was in reaching Muslims for Christ. And unfortunately, he died a few years ago, very young, of cancer. But he wrote a book called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. Awesome book. It tells about his story and stuff. But one of the things he points out there, and I believe in some of his teachings too, is there's been studies done, and there's like this phenomenon that Christian Muslims are noticing that's shared among their stories of coming to Christ, is that Christ often reaches out to them through their dreams. And I found that so fascinating because in the Muslim world, a lot of stock, again, is put into dreams and visions, and these are very significant. And so it's through that avenue that God reaches out and is rescuing Muslims by the hundreds and bringing them into a relationship with him. And it's amazing. Like, he just shares these stories of so many Muslims who have like the same exact experience, basically, of like witnessing Jesus. And Jesus says, come to me, come to me. And, they start on this journey seeking him and come into relationship with them. Because this is how God works. He meets you where you are at. And all he is looking for is an open heart. Are you open to him, or are you closed off? Because he also has a warning for those of us who are closed off. He says that we're without excuse here. This is the idea of general revelation, that God has revealed himself. There's enough out there in creation to at least generate an openness in your heart to him. There's enough to do that. Romans 1:19-20 says, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. So that's the world. The world is without excuse. There's enough in creation to know that God exists, that he is powerful, and you can know things about his nature, right? The fact that we have like morals, right? That intrinsically we know murder is wrong. Like, it's not cool to torture people for fun, or for example. Like there's things within us. There's things about creation. There's things about who we are and the way we are that point to a creator God and about his nature. And so there's enough there to say that God exists. And so to reject him, to close yourself off from him, there's no excuse anymore. The Bible's position on this, God's position on this, is that intrinsically, whether you've buried it deep or not, everyone recognizes there is a God. That's within all of us. But the reality is we can suppress that knowledge. And that's, the other point that Romans makes, is that we can suppress the knowledge that God is there. And that's why not everyone agrees that there is a God or that we can know him. Why do we suppress God? Well, Romans also tells us that it's through our sin. It's through sin. And sin is basically, just, if you want to say it in a word, it's selfishness. It's that I want to be my own God. And so the idea that there is some other God out there, right, that means that, he's the ultimate creator. That means what he says goes, and his will trumps my will. And so for people who are full of pride and full of themselves and want to be their own God, the idea of humbling themselves and accepting the Lord as their God is challenging and difficult. Jesus himself says that the road to destruction is wide, but the path to salvation is narrow, which means that the majority of people will reject Christ. That's just the reality. And it's pretty wild to actually think about, because the narrow path to salvation is free, right? There's no cover charge there. There's no toll booth. It's like you literally ask for it and you're given it. That's grace. Jesus died on the cross, paid for your sins. If you receive him, ask him in your heart, ask for his forgiveness, that's it. He enters, you're forgiven. That's the path to salvation. Your sins are covered at that point. And yet, the majority of people reject that. Don't do that. How could that be? Well, there's lots of reasons here, but there's the apathy, where just don't care to know. But ultimately, what's at the heart of that is an unwillingness to humble ourselves, because that's really there is something humble about saying I can't do it, right? I need God's help, and that's certainly the Bible's position, that we can't be holy enough, we can't be good enough on our own, we can't save ourselves, we can't. It's impossible. We need Jesus to do that for us. So I suppose, there is an element of humility there, admitting that, right? Jesus saved me. I can't do it. And that's a really hard step, though, for people. It's amazing the power of sin. It's amazing the power of pride. Don't be like that. Don't be like Herod, who was full of pride, totally blind to the reality of Jesus. He was never going to be able to receive grace, to receive forgiveness, right? He was his own God. The Magi, though, They recognized, they were open to it. And when they met the king, they recognized him as the king, and they gave gifts. So again, I'll repeat. At the end of your life, after you die, it doesn't matter how good you've been. All that matters is whether you sought out Jesus or not. That's all that's going to matter by the end. What did you say to Jesus' offer? Anyway, so now they departed. It says in 13, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Out of Egypt I called my son. Okay, so a few interesting things here. First of all, I found it fascinating in my research here to find that there's extra biblical sources that also tell us that Jesus went to Egypt, right? It's not just something thrown in here in the Bible, something interesting, but we have extra biblical sources, even from non-believers, confirming the fact that, yeah, this Jesus guy was in Egypt. In the Shabbos, this is actually from the Babylonian Talmud, which is a collection of like Jewish, it's the Talmud, it's the Old Testament, and also a collection of rabbinical writings, historical records and stuff found, but non-Christian. But anyway, they admit, yeah, Yeshua, Jesus, was a magician and learned his skills in Egypt. All right, that's where he learned his skills. And also we have an anti-Christian apologist, an ancient writer, Celsius. He agreed, according to Origen, Jesus was brought up as an illegitimate child in Egypt, that he discovered certain miraculous powers, and that on returning to his own country, he used them to substantiate his claim to deity. Fascinating, right? So, not only do these non-believers and non-Christians confirm that he was in Egypt and came out of Egypt, but they also confirmed that there's something really special about this guy, that he could do miracles. And that's what I find really fascinating is like even the critics of that day had to admit, yeah, he did miracles. And there was something supernatural about this guy. Duh, yeah, everyone knows that basically, right? But their explanation is, yeah, he learned that stuff in Egypt, like, you can learn all kinds of crazy stuff in Egypt. Anyway, I find that fascinating. But this is interesting too, because at the end he says this was fulfilled as what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Out of Egypt I called my son. So a fulfilled prophecy. This comes out of Hosea 11. But this is really weird. And actually, this kind of threw me for a loop when I was a kid. Not a kid, but when I was reading this when I was younger. Because if you go to Hosea 11 and read it, out of Egypt I called my son, it is quite obviously not talking about the Messiah, but talking about Israel. And so he's saying that my son is Israel, and I led you out of Egyptian captivity through Moses, who set the slaves free and all that kind of stuff. Like that's pretty obviously what he's talking about in Hosea 11. So when he says this was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I call my son, I call that a stretch. Like, the author here is like just scanning the Old Testament like, oh, son. Oh, it says son there. Yeah, it says Jesus. That's Jesus. Yeah. Yes. No one will catch that, But then any guy could just look it up and be like, well, I don't think that's Jesus. Weird. Why would he do that? So that threw me for a loop. But actually, if you do a little bit of study, it shouldn't. And the ancient person, this would not throw them for a loop because it would be a very dumb mistake to just kind of throw that out there and expect people didn't know that was like a different thing in the Old Testament. Because back then, especially if you were a Jewish scholar, you were tasked with memorizing the Old Testament if you were, a religious leader in that day. But, it would have been easy to shoot this down. But if you were an ancient person, you'd understand that the word fulfill, pleru, in the Greek, has a wider definition than we have for it, right? When we say fulfill, we have the first definition there, just to literally fulfill. And there are lots of examples of that in the New Testament and Old Testament. But fulfill also incorporates, with Matthew's use, is to make complete, So it's like kind of pointing to the fact that, yeah, this was talking about Israel here, and it's talking about the Messiah here, that there is a similarity here, that there's like, this makes us complete. And there's connections that we have to make, right? So for example, back in the day, got, out of Egypt, I saved my son. Okay, they're being saved from a tyrannical dictator, Pharaoh. Okay, and in this case, Jesus has been saved from Herod, that kind of thing. So he's drawing a connection between the two. Israel was attempted, the whole nation was, Pharaoh attempted to kill him. Herod attempted to kill Jesus here. Brought out of slavery into salvation, right? And he's drawing significance to the fact that all of your history, all of your Jewish history, all that's there in the Old Testament, it's been working up to its climax. And its climax is in Jesus Christ, right? He's the perfect Israel, right? He mirrors Israel in all these most important ways, but he's set apart in that he's perfect. And in all the areas where Israel failed, because Israel came out of Egypt, they were in the desert, but they wandered for 40 years. They rejected God time and time again throughout their history, but Jesus wouldn't. And so he's drawing the connection that, look, he mirrors Israel, but in a perfect way. He's the ultimate fulfillment. So he's saying a lot more with that word, and an ancient reader reading this would totally get that, and we don't. So that's why we have to have a teaching about it. Get it? Anyway, 16 through 18 says, then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Okay, so this is what's known as the slaughter of the innocents. Totally devastating. I'll just mention here, this is actually an area that's it's not even that debated. It's slightly debated in the critical world. Although if you go into the world of theology, I'll tell you, there's a critical paper on any little small topic. Every word of the Bible, someone has a paper on it about how that's wrong, because that's how you get published and that's how you make a name for yourself. So you shouldn't be surprised that there's controversy on everything, however made up. But the only controversy here is that there's no extra biblical sources, tablets, historians writing about this slaughter that happened. But that shouldn't surprise you, because Bethlehem is kind of like a podunk, out of the way city. It's like a village, basically, not that big. And it's the Hebrew children there, under 2, which would have been not a huge number, not enough to make national news. You know what I'm saying? So we shouldn't expect that it'd be everywhere in everyone's histories, and especially not in Roman historians writing about it. And also, it's very well in line with how crazy Herod was, and he did stuff like this all the time. For him, this is just a Tuesday, So again, it's not that crazy. Anyway, but then this then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. It says, a voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. So he says this was fulfilled. But it's a similar fulfilled as we just saw in the previous verse about out of Egypt I call my son. Because if you go, this is quoting out of Jeremiah 31. If you go back and read that, it's pretty obvious that this is referring to the slaughter of Israelite children from the Babylonians, who came and sacked Judea, destroyed the temple there, and there was a great massacre, and they led the people into exile. And so Jeremiah is talking about the weeping from the people of Israel there, and here it's talking about the slaughter of the innocents. But once again, it's not literally, that is just about Jesus, right? It's kind of there's this dual thing going on, a mirroring thing going on. And also it makes perfect sense that he's bringing this prophecy, this passage to bear here, because if you go to Jeremiah 31 and then continue reading that same chapter, you arrive here, verses 30 through 34. This is a prophecy about the later times, the era, the new covenant that the Messiah would come to bring. It says, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days. So this is the days of suffering, the days of Babylonian captivity. Declares the Lord, after this is done, I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. So he brings this message of hope that you're suffering right now from Babylonian captivity, but there's hope because I'm going to deal with the problem of sin somehow, some way. The ancient person would say very mysterious. The ancient person would say very hopeful, though, because Israel had struggled time and time again with being faithful to God. They would worship idols. They would abandon him. They would, adopt pagan practices like even child sacrifice as they, worship these other gods, which is terrible. And they just failed over and over again. And here is this hope that failure isn't going to continue. I'm going to save you. I'm going to rescue you from your sin. I'm going to forgive your sin, and I'm going to dwell within you. I'm going to put my law in your heart. And as we continue reading the New Testament, we find is this fulfilled through Jesus sending the Holy Spirit to dwell within Christians. And people who receive God, they get the Holy Spirit. God dwells within. Their sins are forgiven. It totally makes sense now reading this. But again, the ancient person reading this be like, what is this? How are sins just going to be forgiven? What? This is why Jesus had to come to die first. They expected a Messiah who would come and conquer and destroy, right? Destroy the Romans, set up the new kingdom. Instead, they got a guy who came, lived a humble life, and died miserably, right? Mission failure. No, mission accomplished because he had to come and die and accomplish this prophecy right here, that he would die, that he would pay and enable God to forgive iniquities and sin. And so it makes total sense here that Matthew's calling back to Jeremiah because it's like, this time of suffering, but this hope is here. This hope is here, and it's Jesus, right? He's coming to fulfill this in totality. And everyone's going to know God who wants to. That's fascinating. But continuing in verse 19, it says, "But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Rise, I take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. And he rose and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there." Yeah, Herod's son was like just as insane as he was. Anyway, there might have been some inbreeding there too, that's suggested, so that makes sense. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. Okay, so this is also interesting because he would be called a Nazarene that's not a direct quote from the Old Testament at all. Those exact words are not found in the Old Testament. So that's kind of bizarre. Why are the prophets talking about this then? What prophets is he talking about? So a couple possibilities here. One, he could be talking about, there's a prophecy talking about the stump of Jesse. There's going to be a shoot coming out of the stump of Jesse, which is a prophecy about the Messiah. And that word for the shoot that comes up is Nazir. So it sounds very much like maybe it's talking about that. But also being called a Nazarene in those days was an insult. And it's because there was a Roman garrison there. If you were from Nazarene, you were in cahoots with the evil Romans. So if you're a Nazarene, you're disgusting, you're terrible. And, so this was like an insult. And John, talking about, life of Jesus here, John 1:46, "Nazareth," exclaimed Nathanael. "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" If you're from Nazareth, disgusting. And so what I think this is kind of a callback to the idea that Jesus is going to be despised and hated and shame, live a life of shame. This is what he's basically saying. The prophets predicted he would be living a life of shame and the suffering Messiah, that kind of thing. And so, he'd be called names and, despised and hated, that kind of thing. But the point is, so Jesus is back there and he came. We saw these three reactions to him. We saw Herod. Right, he was cynical. He was like, "Nah, no, can't be." Nah. And at worst, outright hostile, of course. And he certainly was not open to receiving Christ or hearing about, understanding who he is, and receiving him as Lord. Very closed-minded individual. And so this is one of the possible reactions that people, and I've seen, take towards Jesus. I've seen each of these reactions, and these are the people that, they're openly cynical or openly hostile. Totally closed off, not willing to listen, not willing to hear it, don't even talk to me. And so, I've talk to people about that. It can become like a waste of time because it's like you're discussing things. And I've even said things like, well, if God, let's say for the sake of argument, God was there. God did exist, right? Would you believe in him? Would you trust him for salvation? Like, no. Not even then. It's like, well, let's just not talk anymore about this because we're not going to get anywhere, right? It reminds me, there's an interview with James May, who's one of the hosts of Top Gear, but he's like a super atheist. And, they ask him like in the interview, like if there was a God, like, would you be a Christian, And he's like, no. He's like, if I saw God face to face after I die, he would have to apologize to me, And he was like just super like angry and bitter about it. But it was just like, dude, I promise you, no one's standing before God because everyone's going to stand before God someday. You can know that for a fact. But there's no one going to be standing before God defiant like that. Like you have no idea the kind of power that you're messing with there. Like it far eclipses you and you're not going to be in a position of power, and that is the reality. Everyone's going to be standing before God someday. It's just a matter of, are you going to be standing in your own self-righteousness, or you're going to be standing grateful, having your sins covered, having God's righteousness being given to you. But anyway, let's talk about the second group, the prophets and the scribes, right? These are the people that knew the Old Testament. They would know this stuff, and yet they did nothing, which really, mirrors the attitudes of being apathetic, preoccupied. They're just too busy. And I would say really, this is probably the most common reaction I find to Jesus, because like the outright hostility, I've seen it before, but I don't see it all the time. Most people are kind of like, they're not willing to be that angry about it. But I do see this a lot. It's kind of like, oh, I never really thought, I don't know, I'm too busy. I don't have time for that stuff. Not really interested in that. And I'll tell you this reaction is the reaction I understand the least. I don't get it. When I was like in high school, especially towards late high school, early college, this is where I struggled with the most doubt in my life. As I was encountering like atheist arguments and stuff I'd never seen before. I got all that addressed and stuff. But like during my struggle with doubt, I always knew this. I always knew that this question of God, of can you know God, all that stuff, I knew that was of prime importance. I always knew that, right? Because it's like the question on, is God there? Does God want to have a relationship with me? Can I know God? What's going to happen after I die? Like, I knew that was of prime importance, just logically, So the idea that people are just nonchalant about life after death, that people are just nonchalant about God, his existence or not, makes zero sense to me. It's not logical, right? The question on if God is there, nothing could be more important than that, right? If he is or not, that has eternal significance, right? I suppose, like, if he's not there, then none of us have anything to worry about, right? It's just going to end. But if he is there, it'd be bad to have that wrong, yeah? It would. I'm just saying. So, if that's kind of your attitude, and it's just, you've just like been like, I don't know, whatever. And you got like, okay, but I would just ask you to question that. Like, does that make sense? This is the most important question you could possibly figure out and understand for yourself. Is God there? Does he want to know me? And you'll find a pretty hopeful answer in the Bible. The answer is yes, he does, which is what the Magi found out, right? They were seekers. They were true spiritual seekers. They sought the truth and they found the truth. And that's all God's looking for. He's not looking for your good deeds. He's not looking for you to prove yourself to him. He wants to prove himself to you. And so if you're open to him, if you have a seeking heart, God will recognize that. And that's a challenge I'll put out there for anyone who would not consider themselves Christian here tonight. Great place to start. Try praying to him. Just try praying to him in the privacy of your own heart. You got nothing to lose. No one will know but you and God. Pray to him and ask him to reveal himself to you if he's there. And I bet you'll be surprised by what you find. Because I know a lot of you out here tonight, your testimony involves that. It involves like a point where you reach like, God, if you're there, show me that you're there. And I know there's so many testimonies that people have done that and God has done that in significant ways. You'll be surprised. Ask him to show himself and he will. But what he's looking for is that open heart. So that's the most important thing we can do, is some self-reflection here. Do you have an open heart to him, or have you already decided in your heart an answer, and that's it? Don't be stuck, because if you're stuck, that's it. That's the way it's going to be. Anyway, I'll go ahead and pray, and we can open up to questions after that. Lord, I just thank you that you do reveal yourself to us, that you've revealed yourself through your Son, Jesus Christ, that you've made access to you free and open to all people. I thank you that you provide us real answers in a time of distress and anxiety, like world politics, what we're seeing around here today, Lord. It's just nice knowing that, ultimately you are in control. And should the worst happen, that we die, I know that I'm going to see you, and I'm going to be glad that I see you, Lord. And, I just pray for anyone here tonight that doesn't know you, that they would be seeking you out. And I know that you are the kind of God who honors that. And that's ultimately what we're looking for, Lord. So just pray you could be drawing people to you. And thank you for entrusting us with this mission too, to share your good news, Lord. Just pray for a good night of fellowship. Amen. Okay. Well, if you have any questions, comments, there is a mic up there. And I think our telephone line is open, and maybe Calvin will read that if he has one or two, but feel free to share. And also we have a donation bag going around maybe. And if you're new, we're not asking for your money. You can pass the bag along. We'll give you a free book that's back there if you're trying to seek. Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yes. So you're saying that as far as reactions to Jesus goes, the one that you see these days most often is the apathetic or preoccupied reaction. And so I'm just wondering if you have any insight or suggestions on how to work with somebody, or if it's worth it to work with somebody who has that kind of reaction. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you can do is pray for them, and that the Lord would stimulate that kind of excitement or an open heart in them. We're told to pray for people like that. That's one thing you do. Another thing you do is just challenge them to read the Bible for themselves. So, a good book to start, like John or something. And so oftentimes people are like, whatever, I got some time. My Bible app is free, and so they'll read John or something, and then something will stir, And then the third thing, I suppose, is just exposing them to Bible teaching. Because a lot of people are apathetic because they don't know how important it is. And so if you tell them, or they're around other people who recognize the importance of it, that might, rub off on them. So I guess that's what practically I would suggest. My beautiful wife. She's my wife.
I thought you were calling me beautiful.
I would never say that to you. No, I'm just
No,
your new haircut's killer, and I think it fits you really well.
Thanks.
And you are beautiful.
I appreciate that. You've distracted me. Anyways.
I make you blush. I'm sorry.
I don't have any particular comments or questions about the teaching other than to say, well done. It is pretty important to decide who this person who claims to be the Lord of the universe actually is. But I did want to add on a little plug, an addendum for the Burden Recovery group that Calvin was talking about. Because one of the things it very much is a group for people with addictions, like Calvin talked about, whether it's alcohol, porn, gambling, gaming, whatever. But it's not just for that. It's for any sort of really big life issue, or even moderately big life issue that people are dealing with. And I figured I would read off a list of topics that make sense and that other people have gone to similar groups to help deal with as well.
Okay.
Topics relevant include, but aren't limited to, adult children of alcoholics, people with anger problems, people who have chemical addictions like we talked about, people struggling with codependency, eating disorders, financial recovery, love and relationship addiction, sexual addiction, people who are in relationships with a sexually addicted person, food addiction, same-sex attraction, sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, any of those things and more.
Yeah.
And then we have gender-specific groups that break out and talk about those things. So if you're a guy who's struggling with stuff, you're not talking with a bunch of girls, and vice versa. If you're a girl, you're not talking with a bunch of guys about it.
Yes.
But it's exciting to be there. I go there both to help with some of my own issues and to try to help other people with theirs. And it's a fun time, man. It's something I really look forward to every week.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's worth bringing up on the regular here because there's a ton of people with hidden battles and struggles. And so that's the hope, is you don't have to like struggle alone anymore. And if you can bring it out in the open, talk about it, deal with it, you'll find grace, you'll find forgiveness, find love, and you'll find freedom. It's awesome. Stop struggling alone, whatever it is. Yeah. 6 p.m. in here.
Yes, 6 p.m. here on Thursdays. If you want any more information, you're welcome to talk to me. Kyle or any of the other leaders can probably point
Rich
you
Hunter
in the right direction.
And
Rich
Ted
Hunter,
Howell.
yes.
Yeah. Very good. Nick,
Hey, Kyle.
breakfast tomorrow?
Yeah, dude, I texted you.
All right, let's go.
You're just like your dad. You know? So I was gonna ask you a little bit if you could expand some more. I'd never heard until you're teaching tonight about the like astrological aspect where Jupiter equals Israel and
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, Saturn was Israel.
Yeah.
And Jupiter is this royal planet. Was that like pretty widely believed like around the
Yeah.
world at that point then?
Yeah, astrology is very common, like superstition. That's like, today there's a very small group of people who assign significance to the planets and, all that kind of stuff. But I suppose not that small. There's a lot of astrologers today. But back then, especially common. And so I didn't even know that either, which planets represented what. But in my research here, yeah, that's, there's our historians, are finding that out and pointing that out. Like there's a lot of, tablets and stuff they're finding about these ancient superstitions that confirm this kind of stuff.
So, yeah, specifically with Israel, it seems amazing that like little old Israel, especially at that time, they weren't like thought of as like some sort of powerhouse. That they're
It used to be, a powerhouse, but yeah. So they were a Semitic people, so they were still significant to the area and the region, and they would have relations out there with the Persians and stuff like that. So they would be sharing ideas or sharing astrological things, whatever. But yeah, so there was commonly held regional astrological beliefs that would spread, especially in the Roman world where people could get anywhere and everywhere really easy, Pax Romana, that kind of stuff.
cool. Thanks for expanding on that.
Yeah,
man. Good
absolutely.
job.
Thank you, Nick. See you tomorrow morning.
Hey, Kyle. I wanted to touch on that reactions to Jesus, the number 2 that you said is the most logical conclusion and the hardest for you to understand. And it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Logically, totally agree with that point. Unfortunately, I am more of a feelings person versus a logics person. So that's the one I understand the most from a feelings aspect of somebody who can be very like, oh, that sounds like really serious. And if I don't think about it, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so I think that with that thought, it's very serious. And if it's true, there's like a lot of things that I have to consider. And that just sounds like a lot of work and it's scary.
Yeah.
And I'll be held accountable for my sin and it's just scary. But if you're taking that approach and you're just like, that sounds a lot easier not to do that. It's actually amazing and not scary and like the most fulfilling thing that you can do. Like God will meet you where you're at, like you're saying, and he doesn't want to judge you and he doesn't want to put all this wrath on you, because if you believe, okay, well now I'm seeing that the Bible's real and I have to be held accountable for my sin. Like Jesus already did that for you. You accept that and it's easy and it's helpful, and then all these other things that you are scared and
Just
afraid
give it a
of
try. Yeah, exactly.
aren't
I mean,
as
just try.
scary
What do you got to
anymore.
lose?
So
Yeah.
if you're in that boat and you feel that way and it's scary, like it's really not. I totally believe that. So
Preach it. Very good, Monica. Thanks. Hello.
Hi. So these 3 magi are, excuse me, but how long were they in their other religions or whatever before they had these visions with this guy's situation and then found their way to baby Jesus or
How
whatever the
long were
situation
were they
was?
in their religion, you're asking?
Yeah, if they even have one, maybe they were just astronomers. And then also my second point is, do you ever get tired reactions, like people who are just sleepy, like spiritually, like, like ready to let's take a nap?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, so for the first point, they would have been, raised in their superstition, their belief their entire lives, right? And so they would have been enmeshed in this stuff. They would have known their belief well, which is why God used their religion, their belief to reach them, right? He used what it was, the plants, the stuff that they assigned significance to reach them. As far as your second point, yeah, the tired response, I might combine that with like almost the apathetic, because you would say, like I'm too tired to care, which I hear people say a lot, right? Because I'm just tired and there's a lot going on in my life. And I suppose, one of the things the Bible says is that the world is in the hands of the evil one. And so he blinds the minds of unbelievers. And I think that he orients things in people's lives to keep them from thinking about God. And so he'll get people very busy. He'll get people thinking about their own private lives, what's going on, and fill them with activity and busyness so that they're too tired to think about God. And I think it's one of his tricks that he does really well, and that we need to, try to challenge people to rise above, to reject that, right? And say, you know what, I'm going to think about God anyway. And that's all he asks for. He's not asking you to, pray for 10 hours a day. That's like super exhausting. He just says, are you willing to open your heart to him? And if you are, he'll tell you the truth about who he is. Yeah.
Oh, and also, what about the people who are, find themselves in multiple categories, like the people who have those people and their parent might be, you might have a Buddhist parent or a Christian parent or a Hindu parent or a pagan friend who you just see the gay as hell. I mean, heaven. What about that?
Good question.
Multi-identifying people.
Yeah, I mean,
Do those magically have to choose, leave their previous and just choose Jesus by himself, or are they still in their old world together?
Yeah, so there's no one who is out of reach of God's love, right? And so no matter where you come from, no matter your religious background, no matter your racial background, no matter your life background, all are welcome to come and know Jesus, right? He reaches out to all people. Now, his interest is in reaching out to you and bringing him into a knowledge of himself and the truth, right? Because, everything can't all be true at once. That just logically doesn't make sense, right? Buddhism can't be true and Christianity and this other religion, right? So something has to be right. And so Jesus' challenge is he'll meet you where you're at, whatever it is you believe. He'll start with you there, but what he wants to do is convince you and persuade you along a path towards the knowledge of the truth. That is, that is the truth. He wants to show you the truth, but he reaches out to all people, and that's everyone's starting point, wherever they're at. Very good.
All right. Got 2 texting questions.
Okay.
So the first one was about the aligning of Saturn and Jupiter. You said that was in 7 BC.
Yeah.
So this question is, so
I knew I'd get a lot of questions about that. Let's bring it.
yeah. So in Luke, it says that Jesus was 30 when he started ministry, and that he was crucified in 33 AD. So wouldn't that make him about 40 years old, which is traditionally not where people think he's at, but
yeah, that's possible.
okay,
Sure.
nice.
That's I don't see how that's not possible.
Yeah.
Why not?
Second question is Kyle.
It's also, I will say too, that 7 BC I find compelling, but I hold it with an open fist. That is, I'm not saying that is absolute certain that it was the Jupiter and the Saturn that drew the Magi. It very well also could have been a supernatural star that God put for them to see alone. I mean, that's possible too. But I do find it compelling that there were these astrological phenomena going on at the same time. Make of that what you will. The main point is, though, Jesus, what do you think of him? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So second question. Kyle, when you're talking, I guess I don't know if this is a question, maybe a comment. Kyle, when you were talking about people suppressing the truth of God's existence, it reminded me of a quote from a book I'm reading called How to Read and Understand the Bible by Larry Richards. It goes, the great power and mighty strength of God revealed in creation might hold terror for those who don't know him. But those of us who see ourselves as part of God's story find that his overwhelming power offers comfort and assurance. This fear and suppression is really important to recognize when trying to reach out to our friends. We should break down preconceived notions of God and show that he is loving. Otherwise, we're trying to prove that a God exists even when they might be terrified of him or think he's evil. Who would want to accept that? Great teaching. Best regards, Joe.
Very good. Was there a question at the end of that? All right, just make sure. Preach it. Cool. Yeah, there's books back there. If you're new, we want to give you a free book. And it's called Discovering God. So if you are starting your journey here, trying to figure out who God is, there's some common questions and stuff that are addressed in that book. But I can feel my congestion coming back all of a sudden, but just in time. We're at the end. Everyone enjoy your night and your evening. Thanks for coming out. Have a good one.